Okay, my name is Dehvan Otieno, and I am lead vocalist and rhythm guitarist with the reggae band Talisman. Well, I was born in Jamaica. I was born in Jamaica, in St. Thomas, in the country part of the island, and I went to Kingston when I was about three, which is the capital, just in case you don't know, and I was raised there until age 12, where I then came to join my mother and father in England. Why so many chimney? Why so many factories around the place? I think was the first impression because, well, we don't have chimneys on rooftops in Jamaica. We don't need them. And at that age, we just didn't know. I didn't know. My first impression was obviously the cold. I arrived here in April, and I think it was one of these Aprils coming up. It was a cold one. And lots of lights. My first impressions. Around about the sixth form, yeah. And that summer, I thought, right, I'll go get a summer job because, apparently people could make a bit of money and be all right for the summer. So I went to the civil service, in particular the Inland Revenue, and asked if I could. I applied for filing clerk's jobs. So you get the files. Whenever everyone's finished with the files, you took them up and took them to the filing room and filed them away. I spent 8 years in that job. Well, not in the same job, but I spent 8 years at Inland Revenue because they offered me a post, and after doing it for a while, maybe about a year or so, they offered me to do some internal exams and things like that, and I got promoted to tax officer in about 3 years. And in those days, job for life. Yeah, in those days, a civil service job, you're set for life. And the pay was pretty good back in those days. Yeah. So I stayed and spent 9 years in the civil service, in the tax office, and it was pretty good. I've heard anecdotes and, I would say 50-50. But I did experience racism in a strange kind of way. Whilst I was in the tax office, I would get this all the time. People would ring in asking about their tax affairs. I would speak to them on the phone, say, if you want to discuss it, come down to the counter and we can have a private room, da-da-da-da-da-da. So they would come in and they'd say, I've got an appointment with Mrs. So-and-so, and I'd come out with their file and they'd look at me. And you could see them thinking, you're black. You didn't sound black on the phone. And one person actually said that to me. He said that, I didn't realize you were black. And I said, well, you haven't seen me. But he said, you didn't sound black on the phone. I know, it's typical of that kind of thing. And you can almost forgive them in a way. You speak very good English. Well, why shouldn't I? Oh, yeah. But I have to say, those anecdotes are few and far between. I don't know if there were times when I was discriminated against and it just went over my head. I didn't realize. But the real overt stuff, I didn't experience it, but I know people who did. That's just how it works sometimes. I grew up in the church, really, and both my parents sang in church, and my surrogate parents, when my biological parents left to come to England, they were church-going people, and they sang. So that was my first experience of sound and music. I remember the first time I heard a guitar, I thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world because I'd never seen one. And I was standing outside the gate, this was in Jamaica, and there was this man across the road in the park, and he strummed an acoustic guitar, and I thought it was like angels. I couldn't believe it. And I just sat there listening to him for ages. And of course, I wasn't able to afford one in those days, and I didn't get my hands on a guitar until I got to England, and went down by Mic Burrows. Do you know Mic Burrows? They're still there. Music shop on the corner of Stokescroft, and you could do hire purchase in those days. You know, pay down 10 shillings and take the thing out and come and pay another shilling every week or whatever it was. Yeah, so that's how I got my first guitar. And I joined a youth club band called the Cavaliers. Wow. And we played around other youth clubs, and then forayed out into, you know, the big bad world. Did a few gigs, but didn't come to much. But that time in the youth club, you kind of like learned a few chords. And of course, you know, girls hung around you because you play guitar. You know? In influence in terms of music, when I first bought my guitar, I wanted to play like Ernie Isley of the Isley Brothers. I don't know if you were old enough to know them, but
not first time around.
I'm pretty sure now he was very influenced by Jimi Hendrix. You can hear it in his playing, but Hendrix was kind of like that for me. I just couldn't understand it. But Ernie Isley was like more rhythm and blues and black American stuff, so I got more into that, and he was my hero. I still can't play lead guitar these days, but you know, that's how I started out. But I remember buying a Burt Wheaton playing a day chord book.
The classic.
And I stayed with that for a few weeks until I stumbled upon the 3-chord theory, where, you know, these 3 combination of chords, and you could play just about any song. And I never looked back, because once I did that, I started to write. I started to make up my own lyrics and so on. So to directly answer the question, I was more influenced by people like James Brown, the Isley Brothers, rhythm and blues from America. I didn't start playing reggae until I started to write, because strangely enough, when I started to write, I found myself expressing that in reggae form. After I wrote about 3 or 4 or 5 songs, I noticed that the things I was writing about was the kind of themes was the same as the Rastaman was singing about, and they sang reggae music, you know, and that's when I first decided to grow locks. I didn't know anything about Haile Selassie at the time. I didn't know anything about the culture. It just looked good, and because these people were doing the same thing as I was, I thought, well, a copy. I just copied them. But something happens when you do stuff like that. Once my locks started to grow, the locks started to influence how I behaved. I can't explain it. I think it's spiritual. Coming from Jamaica, Rastafari is about return to Africa, living off the land, peace and love between your brother and sister and everyone else in the world. And I think that's my nature overtly. You know, I think it's everybody's nature, but I think it's more in some people than others. And once I put on the locks, those things started to come out in me. And it's there to this day. It made the leap from Jamaica to the UK because of the oppression that the youth at the time were experiencing. We're talking late 50s, early 60s, and going into the 70s. And there was a lot of overt racism by then. You know, people just came straight out and said, you know, I don't like you because you're black, and they call you derogatory names. And then after a while, as with any group of people, they just said, well, enough is enough. And we needed some kind of force, some kind of shelter, something to stand with. And when we looked around to see what there was, it was Rastafari who was standing up to authority to say, you know, no, we won't take this. We want to be repatriated to our homeland. We don't like the laws that you're putting on us to live by. We want to live a certain lifestyle. It didn't help that cannabis was part of the culture, which I think they used a lot to downpress the people. But yeah, so that's how it made the leap from Jamaica to England. And then it just began to grow. The Bamboo Club was very famous. It was international. Again, it was a place for black people, you know. And I say that, you know, white people went there as well, but it was overtly for black people. The music, the food, the atmosphere, it was meant for Caribbean people, and anyone else who wanted to come and enjoy that kind of atmosphere with us was more than welcome. And yes, it was a good mix of white peoples and black peoples. And one of the things you have to remember is that reggae is still a minority music, and that may seem a strange thing to say because it's international. But in terms of airplay, it's still a minority music. And it's actually dropped because there was a time back in the 70s, late 80s, when you were more likely to hear a lot more reggae on the radio. Carnival is part of African Caribbean culture. We always did that. So when it came time when our parents, and sometimes, well, speaking personally, my parents and parents of people like my generation, when it came time to celebrate, when they got enough courage to start to stand up and say, you know, to own their culture. This is ours, this is what it looks like, we like it, and we want to celebrate it. That's how Carnival came about. And then it grew from there. I think anywhere that you find African peoples, you're going to get some form of what we call mass. Yeah. And that's the parading of costumes, the playing of music and food, and just the general good time, because that's our culture.
Do you see yourself primarily as British or Jamaican or even African?
You should have asked me that at the beginning, because this is a long answer. Okay. At this stage in my life, I recognize myself as an African person. and I was born in Jamaica. That's just like default of what happened. I don't, although I've spent most of my life now in Britain, I don't feel like I can claim Britain. The streets don't belong to me. I haven't been back to Jamaica now for about 20 years. But the moment I set foot there and go back to my area, that's my place. Although I wouldn't want to go and settle there now, because I want to move on. I want to make that triangle back to Africa. But Jamaica is more mine, even though I've only spent 12 years of my life there, than England is, having spent 30, 40 years here. Because the streets are not mine. I don't know how to describe it. Unless you've experienced it, it's difficult. The only way I can describe it is that my son, the streets are his. Because he grew up in the streets. He grew up in British streets. And so when he goes out to play with his friends, they go to that park and they go to that park and you know, and they go play football over there. So all his memories and his roots are here. And he could say, you know, he's British if he wants to. But I can't do that. And it's not anything to do with not liking Britain.
It's just a feeling.
It's not mine. And neither is Africa mine.
Have you ever been to
Actually,
Africa?
I want to make it mine because I know that's my origins in terms of my legacy, you know, and my heritage. When I do eventually make that transition, I'm going to have to make it mine. But the transition is going to be easier doing it there than it's doing it here. Yes, is that?
Have you ever been to Africa? You've travelled there?
Yes, my first trip to Africa was to Kenya back in 1988, 89. Yeah, and that's where I got the name Otieno. And they told me that if I was born there, because I was born at night, that would be the name that would be given in this particular tribe that we were staying with. So that's where I got the name Otieno from.